If you use the process called the 1031 exchange, which is nothing more than selling one property and buying another, if you use that process, then you will get to indefinitely defer paying the tax that you normally would have on the gain and depreciation recapture.
Mhm.
So if you were like me and you would have been facing a $30,000 tax bill, you would have been able to take that $30,000 and instead buy more real estate. And if you're buying more real estate, then your returns as a rate of appreciation are going to be higher. So the 1031 is simply selling a piece of investment real estate using the process called the 1031 exchange, which requires an intermediary to handle it for you. And you purchase new investment real estate worth at least as much as you sold, and you don't pay the tax.
All right. All right. Welcome back to the Real Estate Law Podcast. Thank you for joining us for another episode. Jason Muth here with Pride Away Stays and Straightforward Short-Term Rentals. We have a gentleman on this podcast that you may have seen elsewhere. I certainly have seen him all across the internet. I know that he is the foremost authority in 1031 exchanges. We're really grateful to have gotten him on our podcast. This is Mr. Dave Foster. He's the CEO of the 1031 Investor. Dave, welcome.
Thanks, Jason. It's great to be here today.
He's legitimately written the book on 1031 exchanges, and I'm sure that's not the first time you've heard that in a recording. But what I appreciate so much about you, my past career before I have my chapter 2 in the real estate investing world was in the media business. I understand what it takes to have a hit song. You got to play it everywhere. You're on, people show up in concerts for many, many years and decades expecting to hear that hit. When you do your radio tour, you're playing that hit. You're probably sick of that hit over and over and over, but that's what makes you the money. Your hit is 1031 exchanges and being the expert in that one field. So, I applaud you for having, such a focus on such a topic that makes real estate investors so much money by deferring all these taxes that we're paying. And you're doing yeoman's work by actually being out there and telling people about what the 1031 exchange is and why you should use it. So thank you
Thank
for all
you.
that, and congratulations for the book and all the work that you've done. So usually at this point, I just say, tell us a little bit about where you are. How did you get into this space? 1031 exchanges is not something that people go to college for, right? And somehow you learned it.
Isn't that the truth? As a matter of fact, I'm a degreed accountant, and 1031s are this real estate tax thing. And the sum total of my undergraduate education in 1031 exchanges was one half of one class period.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is 2 miles deep in a 2 foot wide creek.
Yeah.
And who in the world would ever want to be there? But I have this very kind words. Thank you very much. I really do subscribe to the fact that if you find something that you love and you do it, you'll never have to work a day in your life. And the whole 1031 exchange business that I've developed is really just an outgrowth of our personal real estate investing journey. We used it for ourselves and saw so much the power that it had to change lives and the investors' portfolios and grow wealth. And that we just said, we've got to do this for others as well.
Mm-hmm.
So now for over 20 years, 24, I think, and counting. But we started our journey in Denver, Colorado. I was a Kansas farm boy. My wife was a Minneapolis city girl. We lived in Denver and we had our first child. And that changes everything. All of a sudden, you throw away the TV. You don't care about anything except watching this little bundle. And you realize that the greatest commodity you've got is time. And you can't get more of it. You can only maximize what you're given. And so we decided to set off on a journey of trying to maximize that by becoming real estate investors. Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Oh, very
There's a
much so. I mean, you're preaching to the choir right here. I mean, we all wish we had more time, but I basically spent most of last night, all of yesterday, last night, this evening, on the couch this morning with an almost 5-year-old bundled up next to me because she kept wanting to be close to me. She wanted to snuggle. She wanted to sleep with us. She wanted to spend a lot of time with me yesterday, boy, what a burden, right? To have your child that actually wants to spend some time with you. I have to keep
Enjoy that, my
reminding
friend. Enjoy
I
it.
I have to keep reminding myself that the reason why we're doing what we're doing is so we can have that time for our families. And, sometimes, I remember having a call at 6 p.m. last night that, she kept wanting to come over. And I kept saying, like, listen, daddy's on the phone. I'm on a call right now. I'll be there in a second. And you feel a little bit bad doing that, but then you invest a lot of time with her afterward. And, boy, you found that yourself. How old are your kids now? Are they grown?
They range 17 to 27.
Okay, yeah, so 17 to 27. So, but you remember these years right now, where your kids really wanted to be around you at all times. If you're listening to this and you have young children and you're in the real estate investing space, like, I maximize that time. You probably do as well. It's things like good planning and good financial responsibility that we have to our families that allows us this. So please continue, Dave.
Yeah. So, in order to achieve exactly what you're talking about, we decided to start investing in real estate. And my very first project, I bought a duplex, I fixed it up, I rented it, I sold it, and I thought I made a truckload of money till my accountant pulled me in at the end of the year and said, "You got a $30,000 tax bill." I said, "Wait a minute. That's not how this is supposed to work.
Mhm.
I am not supposed to give everything I make back to the government." And it was at that point that I went on my own little search for finding the answer. And the answer was the 1031 exchange. If I would have used the 1031 exchange and sold that property and used all of the proceeds to purchase another investment property, I would have been able to keep using that $30,000 for my benefit indefinitely. And I don't know if you're a spreadsheet junkie or not, but if you throw an amortization, a compounding interest schedule on $30,000 over 30 years at 10%, tell me
Mhm.
how much money I'd have more in my account from that one transaction. And so that's when I got hooked on it. I said, my gosh, we've got to do it. So we managed to move our entire portfolio from Denver, Colorado to Stamford, Connecticut to Southwest Florida without ever paying a penny in capital gains tax, carving out enough tax-free dollars to buy a 53-foot boat, move our children aboard it, and live and raise them for 10 years on a sailboat, living off the proceeds from our short-term rental portfolio without paying any capital gains. The only reason we could do that, the 1031 exchange compounded that for us.
Wow, I didn't realize you lived on the boat. I didn't do my homework enough. Where's that? Was it docked off the coast of Florida?
We spent a lot of our time in Southwest Florida, the Florida Keys, the Bahamas,
Hmm.
Everglades, north, both east and west coast. Yeah, we cruised down a little bit. Whenever we got tired of the view, we just moved.
That's awesome. What a great story. I mean, 1031 exchanges are not really well known by people that are not real estate investors. Nobody hears about them. It's one of these tax strategies that's kind of the next level. Just when you got into the space, you didn't even know about it either until your accountant told you what your tax liability was. I think about people that have been in past jobs, W-2 jobs that I worked for over 25 years for other companies. And, people that they work hard, they pay their taxes, they maybe own a second home if they know that. But if they don't dip their toe into this space, they don't even know to ask questions about 1031 exchanges. It feels like such, along with cost segregation, these two things feel like such secrets that real estate investors know that the quote unquote average person doesn't know. Why don't you think this is more commonly known among people who aren't out there investing in real estate?
The IRS is not in the business of making life easy for us. So the thought that they would educate people, it just doesn't happen. And you've also got the real estate, the cyclicalness of the real estate market has a tendency to create short term memory among professionals. And by that, I mean 1031 exchanges really became hugely popular again in 1996 with a case law over 20 years where the IRS lost a major case. So from 96 until 2006, they really started to ramp up. The IRS is not keeping current data, but in 96, there were about 70,000 exchanges. By 2006, there were over 600,000 exchanges being done every year. So you see the education start to ramp up, right?
Mm-hmm.
People are starting to figure it out. What happened in 2007, 2008?
We all
We
know.
plummeted off the cliff, didn't we?
Mm-hmm.
So real estate investors lost a bundle. So they were out of the market. We lost 2/3 of the licensed realtors during that time. So they're gone. So who's left in real estate that has this campfire knowledge? We lost a bank of knowledge. And that's where folks like us had to really pick up the slack to re-educate a whole new generation of investors. Because what's interesting I mean, it's kind of scary to think, Josh, but the largest buying demographic of real estate right now, when the last market crashed, they were in middle school.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's kind of crazy to think about, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, generational knowledge is really difficult to pass if something is wiped out and then the next generation doesn't learn about it from themselves, so that it doesn't surprise me that with what happened in 2008 and 2009, a lot of people exited the space, so a lot of the information just kind of went away. We might be facing a very similar brain drain right now with the NAR lawsuit that was just settled, and a lot of people might be leaving the space as well as a result of that. We'll see what happens as that plays out in the coming months and years. But talking about 1031 exchanges, all right, so let's really quickly define it for people that are still listening that are like, well, what are you guys talking about? Right. I know it's been talked about ad nauseum on a lot of real estate and real estate related podcasts, but just so we can give folks who might be hearing it for the very first time, a basic, like, explain it to me like I'm a fifth grader understanding. You can correct me. My understanding is that basically you're deferring your capital gains taxes by rolling one investment into your next investment if you want to, have a like kind exchange of your investments. Please fill in the gaps with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that in a nutshell, that's exactly what it is. If you have a piece of real estate, you're a real estate investor. So you've got a piece of investment real estate and you want to sell that. If you use the process called the 1031 exchange, which is nothing more than selling one property and buying another, if you use that process, then you will get to indefinitely defer paying the tax that you normally would have on the gain and depreciation recapture. So if you were like me and you would have been facing a $30,000 tax bill, you would have been able to take that $30,000 and instead buy more real estate. And if you're buying more real estate, then your returns as a rate of appreciation are going to be higher. So the 1031 is simply selling a piece of investment real estate using the process called the 1031 exchange, which requires an intermediary to handle it for you. And you purchase new investment real estate worth at least as much as you sold, and you don't pay the tax indefinitely.
Yeah, so you're essentially trading your investments. You're not at this point, and there are some other strategies I want to ask about because I've heard you talk about refinancing afterward and that kind of thing. You're not taking money off the table, right? Like you have a $500,000 asset that went up by $200,000 because you bought it for $300,000, and you want to buy a $700,000 asset. You sell it, you technically have a $200,000 capital gain, but instead, if you could do a 1031 exchange to put it in the $700,000 asset, you're still deferring those taxes until the next event. Whether you sell it outright or whether you do another 1031 exchange, you can keep rolling these things forward, but this way you don't have a tax liability on that gain that you made because you're immediately reinvesting that money. Do I have that right?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay.
And as long as you keep, every time you sell the property, you do another 1031 exchange, you'll never pay the tax. So what you just described was the normal path of a lot of real estate investors, where they start small with one property and then they keep buying bigger and bigger and bigger. They move from single families to multifamily to larger commercial and just keep going that way. But a really cool application for Main Street sorts of investors is to sell that $500,000 property and instead go buy two $250,000 properties. So you can also increase the number of properties you have. You can increase the size of properties. You can change types of properties. That's huge because the market is going to tell you where and what are the best investments at the current moment. And so you can use the 1031 exchange to sell and move from any place in the country to any other place in the country, or from any type of real estate to any other type, or from any number of real estate to any other numbers. And the entire while you're getting the benefit of the income from the deferred tax.
Right. Right. So is there, let me back up for a second. I want to think about kind of societal questions, right? Because paying your taxes really kind of helps sustain society and keeps our roads and police and, educators and everything, local taxes, all that stuff, but what we're not doing here is we're not avoiding paying our taxes. We're just deferring the taxes to another situation sometime in the future, right? And that's really just on that capital gain. This is something that really almost every real estate investor understands how to do this is doing, right? They're pushing it forward so they can continue having more or better investments. Like, where someone that doesn't understand this and isn't in the real estate investor game, can't they just look at this and say, well, you're not paying your taxes. I pay my taxes. You're not paying your taxes. Like, how does that conversation go?
That's a great question. A mentor of mine once challenged me to think about the tax code not as the way that the government gets money from you, but to think of it as the government's way of incentivizing behavior. And if you perform the behaviors that the government wants to see, you're rewarded with advantageous tax situations. So when you start to think of, to put it on that spin, you start to say, okay, what is the benefit of the 1031 exchange to society, as you said? Well, when it was started in 1920, it was because our nation desperately needed its agribusiness industry to grow. We were a hungry nation, and there were a lot of small farmers sitting on 160 acres of land from the Homestead Act. And they were doing great, but they needed to grow bigger because they needed more equipment. It was the whole thing. Because of the taxes that they would have had to pay, they were unable to sell their small farms and buy bigger farms. And that's why 1031 came into the tax code. So it let them keep that tax and buy bigger farms. So not only did they get to grow and provide more food for our country, but everybody who wanted to become a farmer, young kids coming out of Future Farmers of America programs, were able now to buy the smaller farms. And see how it creates this flow. And it really vitalizes an industry. So what does that do today? Well, every president I've ever been under has always talked about getting rid of 1031 exchanges. They stop very quickly because they realize that if they do that, they'll generate some more tax dollars that are capital gains tax dollars, right? Which are taxed at a lower rate, and they'll get some. But what will they lose? Because people will not be so anxious to sell their properties, they will lose 2 realtors' commissions, 2 title company closings, 2 real estate attorneys, 2 appraisers, 2 inspectors, 2 painters fixing up the properties for sale and purchase. They would end up losing all of that. And all of those activities, people pay ordinary income tax on. So it's not only providing employment, it's actually bringing in more tax dollars than they would get from these 1031 exchanges. So as soon as and there's some great studies out there. Ernst & Young did an awesome one. They all show the same thing, that the benefit, the actual income to the federal government by having 1031 exchanges available is to the tune of multiple billions of dollars a year because of all the other activity. So it makes sense that it's out there as an incentive. For us, if you're just a regular investor, what a treat for you to be able to use the government's money to benefit yourself, whether it's for 2 years or whether it's for 20 years. As long as you keep going, you'll keep deferring it.
Yeah. What a fascinating way to take us through how we got to where we are today with 1031 exchanges. Because I bet you that the majority of people that have used them or know about them, maybe you're an investor in your late 20s, 30s, 40s, whatever, you have no idea, what the history is of the, this is something that's been around for over 100 years. And I do realize that things, do stimulate the economy, right? I mean, that's why we have the Federal Reserve that, raises and lowers interest rates as well as they feel like they need to stimulate the economy or not. I am not an economist, but I understand that a lot of the policy that the government puts forward, whether it's having this in the tax code or allowing, so I mentioned cost segregation earlier, which we've done a number of those studies that allows us to pull forward depreciation, and use it all right now for assets that are on a shorter depreciation schedule. That's right there in the tax code. Like, they want us to use that. They said this is how you're actually supposed to do it, and if you do it correctly, you'll be incented. I remember hearing something about 1031 exchanges and horses, right? I mean, you could use this on farm animals or something, right?
You used to be able to, yeah, it was any type of asset. People would 1031 exchange jet airplanes and heavy mining equipment and herds of cattle. Actually, one of the biggest pieces of case law for 1031 we do today is over a herd of pregnant cattle where the payment for the cattle was going to be the calves that those cows had. I mean, just put 5 lawyers in a room and you're going to get something amazing happen.
Well, good thing we excluded the attorney from this podcast today, despite the fact that we're the Real Estate Law podcast. Rory's off doing some closing or something, so I'll have to ask the hard-hitting legal questions. Are you an attorney yourself, Dave?
No, I'm the redheaded stepchild in our firm. I'm the accountant. They're the attorneys.
Okay. So how does the 1031 investor make money? Like, how does your company, like, where do you fit in with this entire process?
So in one sense, we're like Switzerland. We're everybody's friend. The IRS requires that you use the services of an unrelated third party whose sole job is to document the 1031 exchange at the sale and at the purchase and to hold the proceeds. The IRS is very concerned that you not touch the proceeds from your sale in between. And so that's what, so it's a fee for service that we provide, and you have to use this anyways.
Mhm.
So
You need that qualified intermediary. Is that the title, right?
exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Just to make sure that someone doesn't take the money to the casino and put it all on red and double the money and then slide it in that account and say, okay, no, here's the money now, even though I just put the rest in my pocket.
Or to look for it after it came up black, right?
Yeah, but well, exactly. Yeah. What are some challenges that people face when they're doing 1031 exchanges?
There are some very rigid requirements that have to be met. There's some timing requirements. You only have 45 days to identify your property, a total of 180 to close. If you want to defer all tax, you have to purchase at least as much as you sell, and some things like that can throw monkey wrenches in. But it all really boils down to finding the good qualified intermediary who's going to guide you through that. And what we're still seeing today is, even in a challenging market where properties seem to be flying off the shelves, right? We're still seeing 95% of our clients are completing successful 1031 exchanges in their mind and getting properties that they're happy with. Mm-hmm. So it really is not that onerous of a process, and it's not that difficult. I've had several people tell me, Dave, you were right when you told me that the hardest 1031 I was ever going to do was my first one. And now they're old hats.
Right. We had a guest on many episodes ago that was writing some software to help financial institutions identify potential 1031 exchanges that they had on their books. The thinking was, if I remember correctly, the thinking was that because if a property gets refinanced or sold, it's likely that the bank is going to be left, without a customer unless they choose to use that customer again. So I think that the thesis of the software was to try to actually help the banks identify who might be doing a 1031 exchange and get ahead of it and say, hey, if you're planning on doing this, please continue financing with us for the following reasons. Oh, yeah. There's a number of, I guess, related industries that are connected to this. Like, what are the other types of people that you work with, in your everyday world, like real estate agents, banks, what's kind of your everyday?
Yeah, we enfold really with just the normal real estate transaction process. So the client is going to use all of their regular vendors exactly the same way they normally would. So the realtor, we're out there answering questions. What kind of properties are going to qualify? How's the timing working for your client? Interfacing them with them that way. With the title company or the closing attorneys, we're working with them to make sure that the documentation is all on square and right where it needs to be. Lenders actually love 1031 exchanges, because the worst thing you can hear as a lender is when you're a week away from close and the client says, "Oh, by the way, I bought a car. Can I lessen my down payment?" Right? With a 1031 exchange, your money for your down payment is sitting in a bank account where it can't move. So, but we're working with the lenders, sourcing the funds, helping them with the documentation on that. So we really interface with the entirety of the real estate commission, from listing for sale to actual closing of the purchase.
Mm-hmm. I just looked up the episode. It was episode 96 with Adam Sharif from NXT CRE, or Next CRE. I think it's NXT CRE. He's in Miami. I should have known that, actually, but go check that out and go look up that company.
Yeah,
if there's something that you've done together. I'm sure there's a lot of 1031 exchange related companies out there, but it was an interesting discussion. It actually wasn't like we didn't talk to someone that was doing it, like was that qualified intermediary. They were trying to supply information to the financial institutions, that were related to these transactions.
What they were probably trying to identify was where the pressure point was going to be for the balance of gain and depreciation, which create what you call your adjusted cost basis, which with the 1031 exchange, when people are saying, "How do I know if I need to do one? What amount of gain is enough for me?" Well, there might be times, depending on your situation, where you agree to pay tax on hundreds of thousands of dollars and not do a 1031 if you can't find the right property, or for whatever reason it's not right at the moment. But my favorite client was on the opposite end of the spectrum. Little old lady in 2004 in Cape Coral, Florida, sold a lot for $11,000. By the time she paid her exchange fee and all of that, she was going to save $500 in taxes. That was it.
Yeah.
I said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And she said, "Dave, that $500 is mine." I said, "You're absolutely right."
Yeah.
So the key is really going to be whether it's right for you at the moment is going to be so very personal. But in general, the more gain you have, the more incentive to 1031. And the world where you live, Josh, is awesome these days, because cost segregation is giving you incredible amounts of bonus depreciation. But the nasty gram from the IRS, of course, is what? If you sell that, they want you to pay it back. But now, even as late as this last spring, we've got a new ruling from the IRS where they will allow cost segregated property to be included in the 1031 exchange. So you can take basically that property that's got a very, very low basis that you've gotten great tax benefits on, and do a 1031 exchange into a bigger property to give yourself more depreciable basis and not have to recapture or pay back that you've already taken. Great opportunity.
The end of the story is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, eventually these things might get passed on to our heirs, at which time there'll be a stepped up basis.
That's exactly right. Yeah, the person who comes to me and says you're going to have to pay the tax anyways, why bother, is just wrong. First of all, because compounding isn't an eternal street, but as long as you're doing it, you're getting it. So the longer you can keep that deferred tax compounding, the better off you are. So that's number one. But number two is exactly what you said. When you die, your heirs receive your property at the step up in basis. So it's as if they paid market value for the property on the day you died. So all that tax that you deferred, you don't pay, your estate doesn't pay, and your heirs don't pay, and they get to start over. I have a family in Greenwich, Connecticut, and we're on our third generation now. It started with Grandpa, did his first exchanges with us 24 years ago, and he died, and his son got all these properties. Now, we didn't hear from his son for a few years, because he inherited them with no profit. So he's busy starting to build his own. But then he started to see profit over above what he inherited it for. And he did his 1031 exchanges with us. He died a couple of years ago. And now his children are just now starting to come back. That's 3 generations, no capital gains tax paid, incredible generational wealth passed on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, think about it. If your parents pass away, and now you have these properties you're inheriting. Yeah, I mean, there's big societal questions about this, but like, frankly, if I inherited all these big properties, I don't feel like I'd want to be paying tax on it immediately, because it's now my burden. Maybe then I have to go sell it. Maybe I don't have the money for it, right? This by being able to do this and having that basis step up, you're wiping the slate clean. Yeah, of course, you're retaining the generational wealth within those same families, but those families have built up that wealth using the tax code to the advantage, and now the children should be able to take the ball and run from it there. I'm a capitalist at heart. I do believe, in being a member of good society. But yeah, like if I was in that position, like if my parents passed on something to me that, suddenly I had to pay a couple $100,000 of tax on, I'd be like, why? They've had this forever, right? Now I have to pay this. So you get that basis. So that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a misconception out there among people that don't like things like this. And the misconception is that a 1031 exchange is a rich guy's deal. It's all these rich real estate investors out there doing it. But in fact, the average price of the sales price of a 1031 property is a little less than $400,000. This is not the ultra rich doing these things. This is Main Street America. And gosh, isn't it kind of nice to be able to have something to give to regular folks? And again, it's an incentivizer. When us regular folks do these 1031 exchanges, we're providing employment to a number of people, vitality to a real estate industry. And it's just kind of a win-win-win.
Yeah.
But especially for the 1031 investor, right?
So your book is Lifetime Tax-Free Wealth, the Real Estate Investor's Guide to the 1031 Exchange. It's up on Amazon right now. You wrote this last year? Is that right?
Yeah, it was like 8 years. You know how it is. It's like 8 years in the making, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it came out just a few months ago.
Yeah. All right. So, literally wrote the book on it. Why don't I'm going to get to our final couple questions, and then we could, put all the stuff in the show notes, and we could learn where people can get a hold of you. Actually, let me ask one last question.
Yeah.
When should people contact somebody like you if they're thinking about doing a 1031 exchange? Like, at what point during that journey?
So by law, the qualified intermediary has to be in place prior to the closing of your sale. So there's your drop dead moment. Don't close the sale of your old property without the qualified intermediary in place. The reality is that the further back you contact, I mean, we'll work with clients who will tell me, I'm going to sell a property sometime next year in 2025. Well, that's awesome, because the more time you have to plan, the more you can direct your steps, and the more you're going to understand about the process, the more focused your search becomes. So sooner rather than later, but don't let a sale happen without at least exploring it with a QI.
Okay. So now people know. Make the sale happen. It's too late. Final few questions. We ask these of all of our guests on the show, Dave. Love to hear what your answers are, just to get to know you a little bit better. First one, if you can get on stage for half an hour and talk about any subject in the world with zero preparation, maybe not 1031 exchanges, maybe something else. What do you think that might be?
Probably volleyball.
Volleyball. All right. I love these left field questions, these answers. Tell us more about that.
I was an NCAA volleyball coach for 10 years.
Okay.
So
women's or men's?
Women's volleyball. Had the chance to work with the national B team for a while, and had a lot of fun.
What was the women's team this past year that had like 70,000 people watching the game?
Yeah, the Olympic women's team.
It was a college. No, it was a college game, I thought.
Oh, the Nebraska game. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they put a volleyball court in the middle of the football stadium.
Yeah.
How crazy is that?
That's amazing.
That's an amazing record. That's kind of fun.
Did you ever think the sport would reach that as an NCAA or as a college coach?
I don't think anybody ever anticipated something like that, because who would ever thought taking a college volleyball game outdoors?
Yeah.
But it's interesting, since, the late 80s, we've seen volleyball resurrect and grow with the beach sport and everything, and then it wanes and then it comes back. But it's just an awesome athletic sport to
Yeah.
watch, to play, and I had a lot of fun coaching it.
That's awesome. Well, and it's great to see women's sports succeeding so much. I mean, like, we have a generation of people who have been waiting for their turn in the spotlight. And, we're now seeing so many prominent women on teams and individuals, where they're finally getting their due.
And you know what? It's always been interesting. You compliment someone like by saying she is the Kobe Bryant of that team,
Yeah.
right? That's always, you compare them. I've always heard that we always compare them to men's athletes, male athletes. Last night, when my alma mater, or a couple nights ago, when my alma mater, Kansas State, lost to the University of Iowa, I'm still in mourning, in the NIT tournament. The coach compared one of their players by saying, that guy is the Caitlin Clark of their team. That's how I know we are starting to reach parity.
Yeah.
When we respect the women's athletes as much as we are the men's.
I watch a lot of professional wrestling, or at least follow it, or have for a long time, and women's wrestling has never been bigger right now. I mean, they're main eventing the big shows, and granted, it's an athletic, tangential athletic, competition, right? It's stage athleticism, but they're still athletes. And you look at a card, and it doesn't even feel weird to have women at the top of the card anymore. And back in the day, there'd be one women's match, like in the preliminary matches. That's it. Second question we have for you. Tell us something you listened. I'm sorry. Tell us something that happened early in your life or career that impacts the way that you're working today.
I realized early on that I'm a nomad. And so the ability to structure my workspace in my life so that I can be as mobile as possible. As you can imagine, we're living on a sailboat. We had to be mobile. As a matter of fact, much of my business developing the 1031 side of it centered around finding the marina that had the best Wi-Fi, or tucking into the anchorage as close to somebody's Wi-Fi as we could get. So the tools now that are being developed for us to have remote staff have really been a game changer and a benefit to me. I have staff located all over the country, and yet I can still be tucked away here in St. Petersburg, and everybody's doing their thing.
Digital nomad indeed,
Yes.
Before it became a thing. Final question. Tell us something you're listening to or watching or reading these days. Anything in the world.
I am back binging on The West Wing again. Are you familiar with that show?
Very much so, yeah. I didn't watch it, but I'm very familiar with it. Yeah.
It is amazing. Yes, they're using weird technology like phones with cords and that kind of stuff on it. But what's both saddening and enheartening to me is that the issues that they dealt with 20 years ago are the same issues we're wrestling with today. The same power struggles, the same human weaknesses and foibles are exactly the same. And that actually gives me hope that as a people, we're going to come through again. And once again, learn how to love, learn how to respect each other, and keep making this nation great.
Awesome. Well, we'll put a pin in it right there. That's a great way to end things. We're going to put all your contact information in the show notes. What is the best way for people to get a hold of you?
Very easy. Simply go to the1031investor.com. Calculators, the YouTube channel, access to the book, consultations with us. It's all you need right there to get your 1031 exchange going.
Good stuff. Literally the author of 1031 Exchanges. Like, he wrote the book on this. So, we appreciate all your time today, Dave. You shared a lot of things I didn't even know about 1031 exchanges from the past. So we love knowing the history of why we have what we have. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we love 5-star reviews. We love your comments. And if you want to learn more about being a guest on the podcast, please go to realestatelawpodcast.com. Fill out our form. We will get back to you and tell your friends about the podcast, because we have lots of wisdom from people like Dave that we want to share with everybody. So once again, thank you, Dave. Nice having you on the podcast. Thank you for listening or watching, and we'll see you next time.